The morning sun slanted across the wide glass windows of the Riverside Grill, spilling golden stripes over the checkered floor that had seen decades of footsteps. The place carried the nostalgia of another era-red vinyl booths passed in places with duct tape, chrome-edged tables reflecting the light, the faint aroma of bacon grease and endless pots of coffee. On one side, a jukebox stood silent, a relic from when music filled the room in the evenings. Despite its wear, the diner carried a comforting rhythm, a sanctuary for farmers, truckers, and the scattered residents of the sleepy town. For Lena, a waitress barely in her 20s, the Riverside Grill was more than a workplace, it was survival. She tied her apron tight every morning, tucked her unruly hair into a loose ponytail, and braced herself for another shift of refills, greasy plates, and forced smiles. Behind her tiredness lay a harder truth. She was scraping together every cent she could to keep the rent paid and cover her mother's medicine-eating world. Didn't give Lena much time to breathe. She was used to blunt comments, used to men who whistled or snapped their fingers as if she were invisible until needed. But she wasn't used to cruelty that came without reason. And on that morning, cruelty arrived. Loud and swaggering, their men pushed through the diner's door as though they owned the air inside. Their voices cut through the quiet, their boots heavy, their laughter sharp. Conversation in the room dimmed instantly. A mother pulled her child closer. An elderly couple stopped mid-bite. The three strangers moved with the restless energy of people searching for trouble, and trouble found its mark in lenity. Started with mocking comments, half-jokes tossed loudly enough for every booth to hear. Then they reached for her tray, forcing her to steady hot coffee before it could spill across the floor. She stumbled but kept upright, her face burning, her throat tight. Each step she took seemed to invite another remark. Another wave of laughter. The rest of the diner sat frozen. Nobody wanted to escalate things. Nobody wanted to be the one who paid the price for interfering. Lena's hands shook as she delivered plates, praying she wouldn't drop one. Her humiliation hung in the air, thick enough that even the clatter of utensils seemed hesitant inside. Lena felt the weight of years pressing down, the endless hours, the lonely nights, the cruel indifference of a world that only seemed to notice her when she was struggling. And now she was reduced to their entertainment. Her dignity chipped away in front of strangers when Lena thought she could not endure another insult. The small brass bell above the entrance jingled. The sound was ordinary, yet it carried a weight that cut through the tension. The door opened and in walked a group whose presence shifted the air itself. Leather jackets, heavy boots, and patches stitched with the fierce insignia skulls entwined with wings and fire. They were men who lived by their own rules, a motorcycle club known in whispers around the county. Their reputation carried shadows, but also a strange kind of respect. People who crossed them rarely did so twice. At the head of the group walked Gabriel, tall and broad-shouldered, streaks of silver running through his dark beard. His eyes were sharp, weighing the room with a single glance. But beneath the steel, there was something unspoken, a steadiness that belonged to a man who had seen too much yet refused to bend. The other bikers followed his lead, moving without haste, without raising their voices. Their presence alone seemed to command silence. The three troublemakers shifted uneasily, their bravado faltering. Lena stood at the counter, cheeks flushed, gripping her notepad like a lifeline. Gabriel's gaze met hers, and though he said nothing, his eyes carried the weight of understanding. The bikers settled into a booth toward the back, ordering in low voices, their movements calm and deliberate. They weren't here for chaos, and yet their silence carried more authority than shouting ever could. Still, the tormentors weren't finished. One, lanky within crawling up his arms, muttered something as Lena passed. She ignored it, setting down their drinks. With a sudden motion, he knocked over his glass, letting cola spread in a dark pool across the table and drip to the floor. He leaned back, satisfied with her humiliation. Lena knelt with a rag, eyes burning with unshed tears. The weight of the entire diner pressed down on her shoulders. Then a shadow fell across the table. A broad hand landed on the thug's shoulder, firm and immovable. Gabriel stood over him, his frame blocking the light. His voice was low and calm, but it cut through the silence like a blade. "She's working. You don't treat people like that here." The room went utterly still. No laughter, no whispered conversations, just the quiet, heavy air of a dozen people holding their breath. The man beneath Gabriel's grip forced out a laugh, trying to appear unfazed, but the laughter rang hollow. Gabriel's hand did not move. His calm was more terrifying than rage. Around him, the other bikers rose silently from their seats, not aggressive, not loud, but resolute. The thugs felt it the unspoken truth that the room itself had shifted. Violence was not needed. Authority had already been declared. The lanky man's smirk faltered, his companions exchanging glances that carried more fear than pride. Finally, muttered excuses stumbled from their lips. They dug crumpled bills from their pockets, slapped them onto the table, and slipped toward the door. Their boots scraped hastily against the tiles as they left. Their earlier bravado scattered behind them like dust dot as the door swung shut. The Riverside Grill exhaled as one. Conversations resumed in cautious whispers, but nothing returned to the way it had been. Something sacred had been witnessed, something that would be riddled in this town for years. Lena remained frozen, rags still clutched in her hand. She looked at Gabriel, who simply released his grip, gave her a single nod, and returned to his booth. He didn't want thanks. He didn't need applause asters for Lena. The rest of her shift unfolded in a haze. She moved from table to table with shaking hands, her body still trembling, but her heart lighter than it had been in months. The bikers remained, talking among themselves, never once making her feel unsafe. There was laughter at their table, but it was laughter among brothers, not directed at her. Occasionally, she caught Gabriel's steady gaze following her, not intrusive, simply watchful, like a quiet assurance that she wasn't alone anymore. By the time they finished their meals, the tension had dissolved, replaced by an odd warmth that lingered in the air. Gabriel approached the counter to settle their bill, his hand placed more than the cost of the meal before her, a tip so generous it nearly doubled. What she made into full shifts, her eyes widened. "I can't take this," she whispered. Gabriel met her gaze, his tone quiet but firm. "Take care of your mom." Then, with no ceremony, he turned and left. The others followed, boots thudding in rhythm across the worn tiles. The bell above the door jingled one final time, leaving Lena standing behind the counter with folded bills pressed to her chest and tears threatening to fall. That night, Lena sat at the small kitchen table in her cramped apartment. The bills lay before her, smoothed out, unreal in their weight. Across the room, her mother's soft breathing drifted from the bedroom, fragile yet steady. For the first time in weeks, Lena allowed herself to imagine more than survival. It wasn't just the money. It was the reminder that someone, even strangers cloaked in leather and steel, could see her not as a servant, not as invisible, but as a person who mattered. The memory of Gabriel's calm voice echoed in her ears, the simple truth behind his words carrying more strength than 100 shouted defenses. She realized she had been walking through life convinced she was alone, bracing against every storm without shelter. But perhaps the world still held places of refuge, even if they came in unexpected forms. Asterisk word spread quickly in town. The Riverside Grill was no longer just a diner, it was the stage of a story whispered at gas stations, rattled at barbershops, murmured over church potlucks. People didn't describe it as a fight or confrontation. They spoke of respect, of men who carried reputations for danger yet used their strength to shield, not to harm. Some called it unlikely, others called it miraculous. But for those who had sat frozen in their booths that morning, it was unforgettable. They had seen courage. They had seen kindness in a form rough and raw, but no less real. And for Lena, the memory was etched deeper than words. The moment had shifted something in her bones. She no longer carried herself as invisible. She no longer moved through the world expecting only cruelty. Asterisk weeks passed, and the memory of the bikers remained like a quiet ember in Lena's chest. She still worked double shifts. The bills didn't disappear. The exhaustion still weighed her down, but she carried within her a different kind of strength, born not from solitude, but from the memory of a stranger who chose to stand with her when no one else dared. Sometimes she wondered if Gabriel even remembered her name, or if to him it had been nothing more than an instinctive moment. Yet for her, it was a turning point. It was proof that dignity could be defended, that kindness could walk into the darkest corners uninvited and change everything. Her co-workers noticed the difference. She smiled more often, stood straighter, her laughter no longer forced. And when another customer snapped impatiently, she no longer crumbled inside. She remembered the weight of Gabriel's hand on that thug's shoulder and the quiet certainty that cruelty could be stopped at the Riverside Grill. Carried on plates clatter, coffee brewed, sunlight spilled across the checkered floor. Life didn't transform overnight, but the world felt subtly altered for Lena. She was no longer just surviving. She was remembering that courage often comes dressed in silence, not noise. Remembering that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands still and refuses to yield. and as she tied her apron each morning, she carried within her the certainty that even in the smallest town, even in the darkest hour, kindness could step through the door wearing leather and steel, and when it did, it would remind her and everyone watching that no one is ever truly alone,